4 years ago, I uploaded my first 2 dark and disturbing lost media videos. In my mind, it's those videos that really launched this channel. Yes, I uploaded the YouTube iceberg video before that, and I've been posting on this channel for over 3 years before then, but in my mind, it's the lost media videos that made this channel what it is today. When I uploaded the third one in 2022, I said that was most likely going to be the last one because I didn't think I'd be able to find enough for another. But like with my last Evil Wrestlers video, I was wrong. Turns out I managed to find 9 more examples. Here are 9 more pieces of dark and disturbing lost media. Al Lucas was born on September 1st, 1978 in Macon, Georgia, where he was raised by David Lucas, a legislator in Georgia's House of Representatives, and Elaine Lucas, a longtime member of the Macon City Council. His high school football coach at Northeast High, Steve Edwards, remembered that Al grew up surrounded by athletics and politics. Al had an older brother, Lenny, who had also played football as a tight end and later joined Al at Troy State. Edwards described Al as an exceptional person and an outstanding athlete, qualities that earned him admiration in the locker room. Numerous teammates praised his positive attitude and commanding presence. During his time at Northeast High from 1992 to 1995, Al broke the school's bench press record at 440 pounds. His performance drew interest from Troy State, where he competed from 1996 to 1999. In his final season there, he earned the Buck Buchanan Award, received All-American and All-Southland honors, and wrapped up his college career with 255 tackles, 25 quarterback hurries, and 11.5 sacks. After going undrafted in 2000, he had brief stints with the Pittsburgh Steelers and Carolina Panthers, before joining the Frankfurt Galaxy in 2003, although he ultimately opted to sign with the Tampa Bay Storm of the Arena Football League that same year. Al's season in Tampa Bay was impressive: 19.5 tackles, 11.5 sacks, a block kick, and a safety, plus a major role in the Storm's championship run at Arena Bowl 2003 against the Arizona Rattlers. Those achievements landed him on AFL's All-Rookie team and made him a hot commodity going into 2004. He ended up signing a 3-year contract with the Los Angeles Avengers in late 2003, and his strong play continued the following year, piling up 18.5 tackles, 3 sacks, 3 fumble recoveries, and a safety. Through the first 9 weeks of the 2005 season, he had recorded 9 tackles and 4 assists. On April 10, 2005, the Los Angeles Avengers hosted the New York Dragons at Staples Center in front of roughly 11,000 spectators. After an early Avenger touchdown, the Dragons prepared to receive the kickoff. Corey Johnson, known for his returns, fielded the ball and was met by Lucas during a seemingly normal tackle. However, Johnson's knee and another block by Mike Horacek collided with Al's helmet in such a way that Al's neck was severely twisted, injuring his spinal cord. Additional players converging on the tackle likely worsened the situation. Al never got up, though several teammates initially thought he was just shaken up. He was unresponsive. One of the only people who suspected something dire was Mike Horacek, who could see Al was in significant trouble. Medical personnel raced onto the field, originally assuming it was a concussion, only to discover the situation was critical. Paramedics took over quickly, and players from both teams huddled in prayer. Al was attended to for about 10 minutes on the field, before being transported to the Staples Center Medical Facility, then moved by ambulance to California Hospital Medical Center just minutes away. The efforts to save him were unsuccessful. At 1:28 p.m., doctors pronounced him dead, although that news did not reach the team until the game ended. The Avengers defeated the Dragons 66-35, and many players later expressed anger that they had been kept in the dark about Al's passing. Meanwhile, AFL Commissioner David Baker had been at the Los Angeles Coliseum watching his son Sam practice at USC. Notified that a grave injury had occurred at the Avengers game, he rushed to Staples Center and grappled with whether to suspend the play. He ultimately allowed the contest to proceed, explaining that he consulted the team's coaches, players, and management. Since there was no official confirmation of Al's death at that point, Baker said he didn't want to alarm fans with an announcement. Even so, the standard post-game autograph sessions were cancelled. None of Al's loved ones had been watching that day. There was no national TV broadcast, and streaming was still in its infancy. His father had been golfing, and his brother was working a security job. Both of them and the rest of the family learned of his passing by phone. They never blamed the sport, chalking it up to a freak accident. Avengers owner Casey Wasserman and teammates mourned openly, as did players from across the league. Quarterback Aaron Garcia spoke of the devastating loss, reminding everyone of the preciousness of life. Lonnie Ford, another teammate, pointed out that any player could find themselves in a similar situation. That same evening, the entire Avengers roster gathered for a barbecue to honor Al's memory. Grief counselors were made available to the players and staff, and an official statement from the organization conveyed sorrow over the tragedy. James Joyner, a political scientist who once taught at Troy State, recalled Al as a mature and decent individual whose death was truly heartbreaking. Coroners eventually concluded on May 27, 2005 that Al had died from blunt force trauma to his upper spinal cord, and that his spinal column had effectively been disconnected from his brain. This meant any resuscitation efforts were likely futile from the start. Following his death, the AFL renamed its Player of the Year and Hero Awards in Al's honor, a tribute carried out until the league's original iteration folded in 2019. As of 2024, the Lucas family still maintains the Al Lucas Memorial Scholarship Fund, awarding financial support to high school students in Bibb County, Georgia. Al entered the Troy State Trojans Hall of Fame in 2016, cementing his legacy at his alma mater. Many players who participated in the fateful game criticized the league for continuing to play with little information about Al's condition. Corey Johnson claimed they were misled and would never have played had they known the true extent of Al's injuries. Footage of the fatal incident does exist. Local Fox Sports West stations carried the game that day. NBC Sports, the AFL's national broadcast partner, had elected not to televise it nationally. Reporter Robert Weintraub saw the clip while writing for Grantland and noted that it appeared unremarkable at first glance. Macon's local news also led with the story. One Facebook user later recalled how the play reminded him of Damar Hamlin's near-fatal collapse in an NFL game in 2023. There is no sign that video of the incident still circulates online, beyond references to its original airing. ESPN did run a short segment on SportsCenter that very night, featuring Fred Hickman, who warned viewers about the disturbing nature of the footage. A blogger named David Breck criticized the coverage for showing the moment while advising people to look away. Despite everything, the only wider known image that remains is a photograph of Al flat on his back, unresponsive, as a teammate gestures for him to stand up. It's entirely possible that the incident was captured on camera by someone in the crowd. Admittedly, this would be a very strange thing to hold on to for over 20 years, but the idea that someone out there just happened to be filming isn't completely out of the question. However, as of 2025, the footage remains lost and won't be released through any official means anytime soon. The boat race of 1990 was the 136th edition of the rowing competition, pitting the University of Oxford against the University of Cambridge. It occurred at the River Thames Championship course on the 31st of March and saw Oxford win by 2 1/4 lengths to claim its 4th consecutive boat race victory. After World War II ended, the boat race solidified its standing as a yearly head-to-head contest on the Thames. Although it had first appeared in 1829, it soon developed into something of a national fixture, typically covering a 4.2-mile stretch of the river. Spectators from all over London and even beyond would watch, even if most lacked a direct link to either university. Still, for Oxford and Cambridge students, pulling off a victory in this event was as good as it got. During this period, Oxford held a clear upper hand. They had won 13 of the last 14 races, owing much of their success to better organisation than Cambridge. In fact, Cambridge had not topped Oxford since 1986, so Oxford arrived seeking a 4th straight victory to narrow the overall standings from 69 to 66. The race attracted major media attention, particularly at home. The BBC had covered it live on radio since 1927, and in 1938 began showing parts of it on television, eventually offering full coverage 9 years later. Their broadcasts have been consistent except for a stretch from 2005 to 2009, when ITV held the rights. In 1990, BBC One included the race within Grandstand, with Henry Carpenter and Chris Ballou handling TV commentary. Meanwhile, BBC Radio 2's broadcast featured Peter Jones and Dan Topolsky, assisted by Dr. Traham Jones, for statistical details. Although this was Jones's first time calling the boat race, he had already proven himself covering events like the FA Cup final and Wimbledon. He replaced Brian Johnston, who had called the contest since 1981, and told Radio Times he believed there was nothing quite like it. A curious mix of tradition and light-hearted pomp. On March 31st, Oxford arrived as the odds-on favourite, having comfortably outperformed Cambridge in a preparatory competition at Reading. Their crew included President Johnny Searle, later a Coke's pair gold medalist at the 1992 Olympics, and a future star in Matthew Pinsent, winner of 4 Olympic golds and half of the duo, along with Steve Redgrave, had saved Britain from leaving the 1996 Games without a victory. Most pundits gave Cambridge little chance, noting their average weight, around 13 stone, lagged behind Oxford's roughly 15 stone. Despite this, they unexpectedly chose the Surrey side of the river after winning the coin toss, even though it was considered a less favourable starting position. Early on, Oxford took command in calm weather, but Cambridge briefly quickened their stroke rate to 38 per minute and wrested a narrow lead. They couldn't maintain it, however, and Oxford regained control. At Craven Cottage, they were leading by 4 seconds, and things almost took a dramatic turn when Oxford edged toward Cambridge's station, prompting umpire Mike Sweeney to warn them. It didn't alter the result. Oxford stretched their advantage at Harrods and were 4 seconds ahead at Hammersmith Bridge. Despite valiant effort from Cambridge's Adam Wright, the light blues faded by the time they passed Barnes Bridge and ultimately finished 2.5 lengths behind. This secured Oxford's 4th victory in a row. For decades, BBC radio commentators have followed the race from a launch boat behind the crews. In 1990, Peter Jones, Dan Topolsky, and Dr. Triam Jones were aboard a vessel named Arethusa, along with producers Joanne Watson and Caroline Elliott. At first, the broadcast proceeded as usual, with Jones describing the action as the boat passed under Hammersmith Bridge. Then, Jones fell silent. Elliott noticed he still held his microphone firmly, but he wasn't responding. Attempts to get his attention failed, making it clear he had experienced a severe collapse. Dr. Triam Jones immediately started CPR, and Topolsky jumped in to continue commentary. They decided to press on toward the finish near Chiswick Bridge, since Triam Jones' medical gear and an ambulance would be there. But Arethusa's engine began malfunctioning, turning what should have been a quick trip into a stressful 10-minute journey. During this time, the race vanished from view in the river's next bend, so Topolsky improvised by calling the action from a small television monitor. Eventually, Tony Adamson, stationed on shore, took over the last part of the broadcast. When the boat finally got to the boathouse, the crew faced another blow. Massive poll tax protests were happening that day in central London, leaving the ambulances preoccupied. No emergency vehicle was on standby when they arrived. By the time Jones finally reached St. George's Hospital, the damage was done, and on April 2, 1990, he passed away at age 60. Early accounts suggested a major stroke, though later sources, including statements from the BBC, mentioned a heart attack as the likely cause. Peter Jones's death was a severe loss to the world on radio sports coverage.
On the day that broadcasting lost one of its most distinguished exponents, Peter Jones, the outstanding radio commentator of the last 2 decades, died today at the age of 60. He collapsed whilst doing what, quite simply, he did best: commentating on a major event, in this case Saturday's University boat race. Peter Jones had a talent for using the right words at the right time. Desmond Lynam described him as the best radio broadcaster of his time: mellifluent voice, erudite, sophisticated, able to transmit his sight to your sound with an extraordinary gift of language. Whether covering the opening ceremony of an Olympic Games or relaying the tragedy that was Hillsborough, Peter Jones had a certain ability and a voice that was totally unique.
Well, I think the biggest irony is that the sun is shining now and Hillsborough's quiet, and over there to the left, the green Yorkshire Hills. And who would have known that 74 people would die here in the stadium this afternoon? I don't necessarily want to reflect on Heysel, but I was there that night broadcasting with Emlyn Hughes, and he was sitting behind me this afternoon. And after half an hour of watching stretchers going out and oxygen cylinders being brought in and ambulance sirens screaming, he touched me on the shoulder and he said, "I can't take any more," and Emlyn Hughes left. And at this moment, stewards, just as they did at the Heysel Stadium, have got cartons and little paper bags, and they're gathering up the personal belongings of the spectators, and the red and white scarves of Liverpool, and red and white bobble hats of Liverpool, and red and white rosettes of Liverpool, and nothing else out there on the enclosure where all the deaths occurred. And the sun shines now.
Though the 1990 boat race was aired in its entirety on BBC One and BBC Radio 2, recordings of that day have never officially surfaced. Unlike other boat races from this period, the 1990 men's event remains elusive online. The only known public footage is a snippet posted in January 2024 by TMC, an Italian channel, showing a short news item about the race. No other sign of the footage has emerged, and it seems that the radio feed won't be released again, out of respect for Jones and his family. On April 16, 2007, a tragic assault on the Virginia Tech campus in Blacksburg, Virginia, resulted in the loss of 32 lives and left 17 more wounded. The perpetrator was Sung-Hui Cho, a senior at the university, who launched 2 separate shooting incidents roughly 2 hours apart, then died by suicide. In addition, 6 individuals sustained injuries while climbing out of classroom windows to escape. Historically, it is the second deadliest shooting by a lone individual in the US and one of the most lethal worldwide. In a chilling twist, Cho had sent NBC a package containing written statements, dozens of photographs, and nearly half an hour of self-recorded videos. The network chose to broadcast only about 2 minutes of the material and is believed to still hold the rest.
When the time came, I did it. I had to. This is it. This is where it all ends. Ended there. What a life it was. Some life. Do you think I wanted to do this? Do you think I've ever dreamed of dying like this in a million years? I didn't want to do this. You have vandalized my heart, raped my soul, and torched my conscience. You thought it was one pathetic boy's life you were extinguishing. I did it for them. I did it to make you stop what you did to me, to the future generations of the weak and the defenseless. Like Moses, I split the sea and lead my people, the weak, the defenseless, and the innocent children of all ages. You had 100 billion chances and ways to have avoided today, but you decided to spill my blood. You forced me into a corner and gave me only one option. I didn't have to do this. I could have left. I could have fled. But no, I will no longer run. If not for me, for my children, for my brothers and sisters. I did it for them. You have vandalized my heart, raped my soul, and torched my conscience. You thought it was one pathetic boy's life you were extinguishing. Thanks to you, I died, like Jesus Christ, to inspire generations of the weak and the defenseless people. Do you know what it feels like to be spit on your face and have trash shoved down your throat? Do you know what it feels like to dig your own grave? Do you know what it feels like to have your throat slashed from ear to ear? Do you know what it feels like to be torched alive? Do you know what it feels like to be humiliated and be impaled upon on a cross and left to bleed to death for your amusement? You have never felt a single ounce of pain your whole life. Did you want to inject as much misery in our lives as you can, just because you can? You had everything you wanted. Your Mercedes wasn't enough, you brats. Your golden necklaces weren't enough, you snobs. Your trust fund wasn't enough. Your vodka and cognac weren't enough. All your debaucheries weren't enough. Those weren't enough to fulfill your hedonistic needs.
This, however, is not the only piece of lost media related to the Virginia Tech shooting. Early that morning, 16 students gathered in room 211 for an intermediate French lesson taught by Professor Jocelyn Couture-Nowak. One student arrived late, explaining that her dorm, West Ambler Johnston, had just been sealed off by police following a deadly incident earlier that day. At around 9:39 a.m., a series of loud pounding noises echoed through the hallway. Initially, everyone assumed it was just ongoing construction, but as the commotion persisted, Professor Couture's demeanor changed. "Please tell me that's not what I think it is," she murmured to the class, alarm evident in her expression. She stepped out into the hallway for a look, then quickly shut the door and urged everyone to hide under their desks. Some obeyed, others froze. Pale-faced, she asked if someone could call 911. That responsibility fell to Colin Goddard, a 21-year-old international studies major who dialed at precisely 9:41 a.m. When the dispatcher answered, Goddard identified the location, room 211, Norris Hall. Confusion on the other end prompted him to clarify Virginia Tech, adding that he could hear gunshots somewhere close by. In the background, frantic noises filled the room. Desks were dragged against the entrance to create a makeshift barricade, a desperate attempt at protection since the door had no lock. Goddard stayed on the phone while Professor Couture backed away from the doorway. Barely a minute into the call, bullets tore through the wood, and Goddard caught a glimpse of combat boots. In seconds, Cho shot Professor Couture and another student, Henry Lee. Matthew Laporte then tried to tackle Cho, but was fatally wounded as well. Goddard, still on the line, felt a bullet shatter his femur. "I've been hit," he mustered through clenched teeth. His phone flew across the floor and landed near Emily Haas, who picked it up and told the dispatcher that the gunman had moved on, but the shots kept echoing beyond room 211. Speaking in hushed tones, Haas explained they were injured and needed immediate help, her voice trembling. Suddenly, Cho returned. "I can't talk," she whispered to the dispatcher, who instructed her to stay hidden. Less than 5 minutes into the call, more gunfire erupted. Goddard took another bullet, and Haas screamed as she felt a graze to her head. "He's reloading," she gasped, barely able to stay composed. The dispatcher tried to keep her talking, but she could scarcely speak. Finally, one isolated blast sounded, and the relentless gunfire ceased. Unbeknownst to those in the room, Cho had just ended his own life. Amid ragged breathing, the dispatcher urged them to open the door for the police, who had arrived and were breaking through chained entrances. Haas set the phone on a desk and stared at the bodies of her professor and Henry Lee, sprawled near the door. Classmate Clive Ireland, who somehow escaped without a single gunshot wound, managed to shift desks and bodies so law enforcement could enter. "Shoot it down," an officer announced, and the call ended. By the time it was over, 31 out of the day's 33 fatalities had occurred in Norris Hall alone. In room 211, 12 people perished, not including Cho. 5 professors of Virginia Tech, including Professor Couture, lost their lives trying to shield the students or confront the attacker. Although the entire 911 recording caught every death in room 211, it was deemed too disturbing to release publicly. A news segment later touched on its existence, but the raw audio was never played. Colin Goddard has refused to hear it, and Emily Haas remains unwilling to discuss what she went through. One responding officer described the tape as one of the most horrifying things she'd ever encountered. In mid-1914, the Colorado Motion Picture Company set its sights on making a 3-reel western called Across the Border. At the helm was Otis B. Thayer, a filmmaker who had stayed behind in Colorado after his previous employer, Selig Polyscope, headed off to California. Seeking to turn Canyon City into a full-fledged movie hub, Thayer managed to secure local banking of around $5,000, a substantial sum at the time, and inked a demanding contract with the Warner Feature Company, later connected to Warner Brothers, that required a new feature roughly every 3 weeks. Western backdrops were already drawing attention to Canyon City, and Thayer's production further cemented its reputation as a rugged setting. He'd worked on other quick turnaround westerns there, such as Pirates of the Plains and The Range War. With Across the Border, however, he decided to weave in a then-current storyline. In the 1910s, the Mexican Revolution dominated headlines, especially the US government's shifting stance toward Mexico. That conflict involved arms trafficking across the border, an element that Thayer built into this film's premise. He cast Edmund Cobb as the lead, Curly Smith, a Texas Ranger sent to stop smugglers funneling guns and explosives to insurgents. Edmund Cobb had started out in smaller parts for a biograph and Lubin before jumping on board with Thayer. His portrayal of Curly Smith underscored his easy fit for Western heroes, an image he would later maintain in his extensive work with Universal in the 1920s and 1930s. Grace McHugh secured her first starring role as Anita, the smuggler's daughter who grows fond of Curly. Critics praised her sincerity, calling her a rising talent. Ted Hardcastle appeared as Dean, a treacherous lieutenant who helps run the illegal operation. To add authenticity, Thayer enlisted soldiers from the nearby 12th Cavalry Regiment for some scenes, and assigned Owen Carter, a one-time harness maker, as his principal cameraman. Production started in June 1914 with the Arkansas River, the outskirts of Canyon City, and other Colorado landscapes standing in for the border. The film followed Curly discovering hidden rifles beneath hay bales, a close call with a sniper's bullet, and an eventual showdown against Dean's band. Anita's loyalty shifts from her father's gang to Curly, prompting her to fight back against Dean's abuse. The final act sees a major confrontation culminating with Curly and the Texas Rangers thwarting the smugglers, and Curly and Anita riding off together to Texas. Although filming seemed to wrap without incident, one pivotal shot featuring Anita crossing the river turned out blurry. On July 1st, Grace McHugh and several crew members returned to the Arkansas River near the Hot Springs Hotel to reshoot. A fellow actor successfully guided his horse through the current, and then McHugh attempted to follow. Partway across, the horse lost its footing, throwing her into rushing water. Cameraman Owen Carter, observing from a shallow bank, ditched his camera gear and swam towards McHugh. Although he was reportedly strong in the water, both he and McHugh became trapped in a patch of quicksand, and the surging current quickly overwhelmed them. Local reports initially doubted whether the incident was real or a PR ploy. Their skepticism faded when Carter's body surfaced downstream days later, and McHugh's nearly 2 weeks after that. over 9 miles from where she fell. She was 24, Carter was 29. Heartbroken colleagues remembered McHugh as a gifted newcomer, and Thayer would later describe Carter's attempt to save her as a purely selfless act. In a grim twist, the Colorado Motion Picture Company and Warner Feature Company used McHugh's accident to promote Across the Border. Advertisements framed it as a tribute to her memory, though some ads barely mention Carter's sacrifice. Meanwhile, theatre schedules were adjusted to release the film sooner than planned, hoping to capitalize on the sudden notoriety. The decision drew fire from various publications, which found it distasteful to exploit the two tragic deaths. Even so, the film saw distribution in August 1914. Despite the publicity, Across the Border did not save the Colorado Motion Picture Company from folding. California's growing dominance made it tough for smaller studios to compete, and by 1918, Thayer's venture quietly disappeared. Over time, the nitrate prints of Across the Border likely deteriorated, were ignited in storage, and none are known to survive. A few photographs and scattered references in trade magazines confirm its basic storyline. While Pirates of the Plains resurfaced decades later, Across the Border remains lost to history, remembered mostly for the tragic on-set misfortune that claimed 2 lives, underscoring how primitive film safety standards were, and how quickly a straightforward shoot could turn lethal. While the 2 deaths themselves were not filmed, it certainly is disturbing to think that the cameras were rolling right up until mere seconds before the 2 died. On February 3, 1998, the Alpine town of Cavalese in northern Italy endured a sudden and devastating blow. A US Marine Corps EA-6B Prowler, conducting a training flight, flew low through the rugged terrain and severed a support cable for a ski gondola. On the day of this tragedy, the pilots were carrying out a low-altitude flight exercise designed for flying close to the ground in combat situations. They were supposed to maintain at least 1,000 feet in altitude, with limits on speed in certain maneuvers. These rules were put in place after a Prowler crash in Yuma, Arizona 2 years prior, where 4 crew members lost their lives in a training run. However, based on measurements by the company that owned the cable cars, the jet seems to have been flying only 260 to 330 feet above ground, enough to strike the cable. There was also a local guideline that required at least 2,000 feet in the Cavalese area, but a military board found that ground controllers never shared this restriction with the crew. Italian investigators discovered the aircraft was speeding around 500 miles per hour, close to its maximum. In the first trial, pilot Richard Ashby claimed that he did not know there was a speed limit in effect. Some witnesses reported seeing the plane soaring extremely low and fast, barely dodging terrain, buildings and roads. Italian Prime Minister Romano Prodi described it as practically, quote, scraping the ground. Later findings showed that halfway through the exercise, the Prowler unexpectedly veered left into the valleys, which went beyond the agreed flight path. An investigative board concluded the pilots maneuvered too aggressively, and prosecutors believed they even performed an unorthodox roll that sent them off course. Then, at about 3:12 p.m., Ashby spotted the cable car on his right and tried to turn away, but it was too late. The jet's wings sliced through the cables, causing the car to crash and kill all 20 people on board. Despite major damage to the plane's wing and tail, it managed to land at Aviano Air Base. This was Cavalese's second cable car catastrophe, the first having occurred in 1976. Initially, all 4 crew members, Ashby, Joseph Schweitzer, Chandler Seagraves, and William Rainey, faced charges, but only Ashby and Schweitzer went to trial for involuntary manslaughter and negligent homicide. Ashby's defense argued that the Pentagon-supplied map did not show cable locations, and he also blamed a faulty altimeter. A jury ended up acquitting him on March 5, 1999, which angered many Italians and put more strain on the US-Italian relations. The prosecution against Schweitzer was dropped soon after. Although the manslaughter and negligent homicide charges were dropped, both Ashby and Schweitzer soon appeared in a second court-martial on charges of obstructing justice and, quote, conduct unbecoming. Investigators discovered that a video camera had been placed in the front cockpit of the Prowler. Contrary to protocol, when the Italian authorities tried to review the footage, they found only a blank tape. It later emerged that part of the flight was indeed recorded, but ultimately destroyed. Ashby and Schweitzer insisted they didn't erase any evidence that would implicate them. Schweitzer claimed the tape merely showed him grinning before the accident, and that he feared TV broadcasts might show him smiling while the aftermath was being shown. After the jet landed at Aviano Air Base, Ashby handed over the tape to Schweitzer, who claimed he threw it onto a fire. Since prosecutors were never able to see the video, they argued during the second trial that the crew had intentionally disposed of the footage to undermine the legal proceedings. As a result, Ashby and Schweitzer each faced charges of obstructing justice and conduct unbecoming an officer. Ashby ultimately served 6 months in prison, lost his commission in the Marines, and was stripped of his military pay and benefits. Schweitzer, who negotiated a plea deal, avoided prison but was also dismissed from service. Their appeals against these dismissals were turned down in November 2007. Since Schweitzer destroyed the video recording, its contents are now lost forever. Only the aircrew members who were present during the flight know what was captured on the tape. In a 2012 episode of Seconds from Disaster titled Cable Car Collision, Schweitzer described the footage as nothing more than, quote, an innocent record of a happy flight. On July 11, 1911, actor Albert Brighton arrived at Brady's Pond on Staten Island to film a rescue scene for the Belmar Photoplay Company, also known as the Henry Belmar Moving Picture Company. 35 years old and already recognized for his success in both theatre and film, Brighton had begun acting for the Edison Company and later enjoyed popularity at Nesta. Trade publications like the Moving Picture World often highlighted his talent for playing rugged heroes in Western dramas and comedies, noting key roles in productions such as At Cedar Ridge, At Panther Creek, Sleepy Hollow, and The Bridal Trail. By mid-1911, having recently married, Brighton left his previous endeavours to work with Belmar. The new production scheduled scenes at Brady's Pond in the Grassmere section of Staten Island. Brighton was meant to film a chase on the water. His character and a, quote, black slave would pursue a villain by boat, hoping to save the hero's wife and child. By all accounts, Brighton was known to be a confident swimmer and believed the pond's depth was manageable. The studio, reassured by his abilities, wasn't concerned about filming in open water. An audience of around 50 or 60 people, including diners at a nearby restaurant, looked on as the first scene was shot. The villain's oar knocked Brighton into the water, and then the slave dove in to check on him. Though he started to struggle when his shirt slipped down his arms, he managed to avoid disaster. The second scene, about 75 feet farther out, involved Brighton rescuing his kidnapped wife. Moments after swimming some 15 feet, Brighton stopped mid-stroke, suddenly raising his arms and yelling for help. Some suspected he'd become trapped by mud or quicksand, while others believed it was either heat exhaustion or a cramp as he fought the pond's current. Love and Belmar admitted they originally thought he was performing for dramatic effect, and the onlookers even cheered, convinced it was part of the act. After a few desperate moments, Brighton went under for a third time and didn't surface. Belmar hurriedly urged his employees to attempt a rescue, but none of them could swim. Two other men named Matty Middleton and Mr. Carrington either paddled over or jumped in. Middleton briefly grabbed hold of Brighton's hair, but only ended up with the actor's wig. Although several tried to assist, no one could retrieve him, but by the time Belmar contacted the police, Brighton had drowned. It wasn't until hours later, around 7 p.m, that authorities finally recovered his body from the pond. Brighton's death made national and international headlines, and the moving picture world paid tribute by reminding readers of his memorable film work. He was eventually laid to rest in Minnesota, with his mother paying for the funeral expenses. Meanwhile, Belmar faced the dilemma of whether or not to continue filming. In a controversial decision, he finished the project, even advertising the footage of Brighton's final moments. Likely over 100 feet of film had kept rolling during the entire ordeal. Though Belmar admitted it was a, quote, cold-blooded choice, the company argued that because Brighton had been considered a proficient swimmer, they deemed it less of a high-risk stunt and thus acceptable to show. Isn't that kind of similar to when Plague Moth would react to people dying on his YouTube channel and then sell the uncensored versions through his Patreon? You know, before he fucked around and found out. The plan to screen footage of the drowning sparked widespread outrage. Both the Moving Picture World and the Motion Picture Story magazine condemned it, calling the advertisement inhumane and ghastly. When Belmar insisted he had the right to exhibit the footage, most theatres refused to show it, and it disappeared from circulation. Belmar later suffered financial and personal setbacks, leaving the film industry altogether in 1918. His actions ended up ruining him. Again, just like Plague Moth, I'm starting to think Henry Belmar was reincarnated as Moth and decided to continue selling footage of people dying over a century after this incident. Over time, newspapers that documented film-related accidents continued to mention Brighton's fate, though the subsequent financial collapse of Belmar meant the incident faded from mainstream memory. Given the massive loss rate of pre-1929 silent films, the footage is almost certainly gone for good. Today, there are no known photographs or archival pieces that capture Brighton's last day on set. The Allman Brothers Band, formed by siblings Greg and Dwayne Allman in 1969, became a pivotal force in southern rock, though the name of the band became obsolete fairly early on in its history as Dwayne was killed in a motorcycle accident in 1971, just 2 years after the band's formation. Also, as we're talking about the Allman Brothers Band, here's Whipping Post. Through multiple breakups and reunions, they finally parted ways for good in 2014. The following year, a movie project tied to the group's legacy sparked immense controversy. Initially announced in May 2013 by Open Road Films, the biopic drew on Greg Allman's autobiography, My Cross to Bear. Randall Miller took the helm as director, and both Greg Allman and manager Michael Lehman signed on as key collaborators. The film, tentatively titled Midnight Rider after the band's 1971 single, began shooting on February 20th, 2014, in a remote area of Wayne County, Georgia. The plan that day was to capture a scene featuring William Hurt, portraying Greg Allman, resting on a hospital bed set atop train tracks high above the Altamaha River. The production had neither secured the proper permits nor followed the film industry's usual safety protocols. Crew members were only warned they would have around a minute to clear out if a train came. Tragically, a locomotive did appear during filming. In a desperate scramble for safety, director Randall Miller and another individual tried to remove the heavy bed frame from the rails, worried it would cause a derailment, until they were forced to flee at the last second. The train struck the metal bed, sending debris flying. Sarah Jones, a camera assistant, was hit by a fragment that knocked her into the train's path, resulting in her instant death. Several others were also hurt. In the aftermath, production halted immediately. Lawsuits and criminal charges followed, with Randall Miller, assistant director Hilary Schwartz, and 2 producers facing involuntary manslaughter and trespassing counts. Despite intense backlash, the filmmakers initially aimed to continue shooting. William Hurt left the project a couple of months later, and Greg Allman publicly pleaded for the production to cease out of respect for Jones. Eventually, he took legal steps to shut it down, and the 2 sides settled. The film was never completed. Only a small amount of footage is known to exist. Because February 20th was effectively a test shoot, principal photography had yet to begin in earnest. A brief clip of scene 14, involving Greg Allman's hospital bed dream, does survive, introduced by Miller alongside screenplay excerpts, as well as a rock video filmed the previous day, which was intended to be an extra on the DVD. Some outlets also released a partial clip of the frantic moments leading up to the collision. Though additional, more graphic material circulates elsewhere online. With production permanently derailed by the disaster, Midnight Rider remains unfinished and is unlikely ever to be revived. Randall Miller, meanwhile, received a sentence that banned him from directing for several years. On April 17, 1907, a cycle maker named Wilhelm Vladimir Zeitz joined a Clarendon Film Company shoot that ended in tragedy. During the final scene, filmed at Stoats Nest Station, he was supposed to lie on the tracks as the train approached. Clarendon was founded in 1904 by Henry Vassall Lawley and Percival Stowe in Croydon, specialising in short British films, everything from Shakespeare adaptations to popular episodic comedies. At the time, the founders were scouting for inspiration involving a dog. They crossed paths with Zeitz and his wife, Emma, who lived near the Clarendon factory. Their Great Dane, Felix, had become locally famous for clever tricks, making him an appealing candidate for a new production. The resulting script turns Zeitz into a railroad signalman who discovers a plot to derail a train. Before he can act, 3 villagers tie him to the tracks. Felix arrives, carrying his master's lunch, realizes the danger, and races off for help. In some accounts, Felix finds Emma. In others, he doesn't. Ultimately, Felix, or Emma in certain tellings, signals the oncoming locomotive to stop in time, allowing Zeitz to be freed and the dog to be celebrated as a hero. Clarendon arranged to film at Stoat's Nest Station, which had 4 platforms serving the London, Brighton and South Coast Railway. A few days earlier, Lawley asked local station master John Samuel Bromley if they could use a siding. Bromley agreed, but he didn't actually have the authority to make the decision, and the railway itself was never informed. On April 17th, filming proceeded without rehearsal, finishing all but one sequence just after noon. The last shot required a train to charge towards Zeitz, who was only pretending to be unconscious on the rails. Bromley later claimed he was unaware anyone would be lying on the tracks. The locomotive's driver, William Podmore, similarly testified that nobody told him Zeitz would be in harm's way. According to witnesses, Stowe, a co-founder of Clarendon, boarded the engine and instructed Podmore to speed up for a more dramatic shot, though the driver thought he was supposed to stop at 20 feet from the camera. As the train accelerated to roughly 10 miles per hour, Station Master Bromley realized it was too fast to hold safely. Stowe stood between the fireman and Podmore, limiting his own view and preventing either rail worker from spotting Zeitz. They waited for Stowe's cue to brake, one that apparently never came. The station master tried to signal the locomotive to slow down, but it passed him unnoticed. The camera operator, Henry Lawley, and another individual began frantically shouting to Zeitz to move. He tried to roll clear, but it was too late. One of the sleepers on the track struck him in the back and dragged him roughly 20 feet. The stunned crew stopped the train at the attended camera mark, then discovered the horrific accident. Emma reportedly fainted at the sight. Rushed to Croydon General Hospital with 9 broken ribs, a punctured lung, and other severe injuries, Zeitz died 3 days later. An inquest convened, showing the recorded footage to a jury. Everyone involved, from the station master to the film's directors, gave statements, but the overall verdict was accidental death. While the coroner suggested the sequence could have been managed under better coordination, the blame mostly fell on miscommunication and the train's excessive speed. Although newspapers around the world covered Zeitz's death, the film itself never reached completion, and Clarendon went on to produce other shorts. Stoat's Nest Station, later known as Colston North, closed in 1983, having witnessed another catastrophe in 1910. Despite the initial public outrage and calls for accountability, no major consequences befell the railway or Clarendon beyond internal suspensions. Over time, Zeitz's story faded from common memory, though it was once cited in early cinema magazines as a prime example of the risks filmmakers ran in those pioneering days. To this day, no known copies or photographs from that unfinished production survive. I think everyone knows the disturbing and quite frankly disgusting story of Fred and Rose West. Fred, the village idiot, and his wife, Rose, kidnapped and killed a number of women over the course of about 15 years and buried the bodies underneath their cellar, with the last victim being their own daughter, Heather, who attempted to escape from her demented parents. It wasn't until 1992 when their daughter Louise confided in her friend at school and revealed the abuse she suffered at her father's hands that the police were finally informed that something sinister was happening at 25 Cromwell Street, the West's family home. Another disturbing detail about Fred and Rose that would come out is that they were both freaks. In the course of the 1992 investigation, authorities confiscated close to 100 homemade explicit tapes, along with an array of sex toys and related items, shedding light on the West's intense fixation on deviant behavior. Fred displayed his part in various disturbing acts, but Rose, who was openly bisexual, was known for her almost boundless sexual appetite. One ex-partner, Catherine Halliday, recalled Rose lamenting that no one, man or woman, could fully meet her needs. With Fred's approval, Rose took many lovers, and folks around Cromwell Street rumoured that she had quite a roster of bar patrons to prove it. Prostitution became both a lucrative option and another outlet for Rose's desires. The second floor of 25 Cromwell Street was transformed into a makeshift brothel, where sex parties were held and advertisements placed in local publications offering Rose's services. One such ad noted the couple's particular interest in older West Indian men, evidenced by how they decorated the lounge to attract their clientele. They also used ads to arrange wife swaps, collecting adult photos from similar-minded couples. Beyond that, they tried to entice other women, like Halliday, into prostitution. Fred eventually recorded Rose and then himself engaging in acts with Halliday. With no protection involved in most encounters, Rose became pregnant several times by various men, and at least 4 of those children were biracial. Some sources even claimed certain police officers were among Rose's regulars. Fred openly encouraged Rose's work and found it arousing. He equipped the bedroom with intercoms and peepholes, letting him listen and secretly watch her clients. He invested in high-end video equipment to capture these encounters, sometimes filming openly, but other times using hidden setups. A number of tapes showed water sports and other explicit acts, and Fred repeatedly viewed them on several stolen VCRs. The pair had no qualms about discussing their sex lives around others. Fred eagerly showed off his homemade recordings, even offering them to his daughter May's boyfriend. Meanwhile, a family acquaintance named Sean Boyle said Rose approached him to star in a threesome on camera, with Fred supposedly willing to pay. Boyle declined. After the 1992 seizure of 99 tapes, Fred and Rose still went on to make at least 4 additional films, before police finally arrested them in 1994. Disturbingly, Fred once tried peddling these tapes to a video rental store, bragging about having, quote, real straight and lesbian footage, along with the sinister implication that they involved his daughters. He also boasted about possessing so-called snuff recordings of women being tortured and murdered. Alarmed staff notified law enforcement, yet nothing truly came of it. Halliday admitted she witnessed some of the West's unsettling home movies, describing scenes so extreme that Fred couldn't fathom why she would want anything more, quote, normal. Together with the video store employee's account, this fueled suspicions that the couple had taped themselves harming or killing their victims. There's also a rumor that among the 99 confiscated tapes were snuff videos, but most were never examined. The police chose to destroy them after Fred and Rose dodged charges in 1992. A few, however, did contain pictures of murder victims, some even post-mortem. Further revelations emerged over time. A 2000 report in the Daily Mirror claimed law enforcement, after raiding a convicted pedophile's home, discovered a compilation tape featuring Rose abusing children as young as 5. This raised new fears about whether the West's confirmed death count might be incomplete. Rose allegedly also filmed Fred molesting their daughter Louise. Adding to the horror was a suggestion that she may have had sexual encounters with her own father, William, an arrangement Fred seemingly had no issue with. Of those early tapes, at least some were destroyed in 1992. It's likely that the copies remain elsewhere, given Fred's eagerness to share them. In 1994, police unearthed additional recordings, some of which went to the West family estate, overseen by solicitor Peter Harris. In a controversial move, Harris later sold the rights to certain West materials, potentially including some explicit footage, for use in a book, film, and documentary. Law enforcement objected to any possible profit from such depravity, asserting Crown copyright claims. In August 2001, Channel 5 revealed plans for a documentary focusing on the West's and failures by both the police and social services to halt Fred's crimes. Channel 5 got hold of ample home video content shot by Fred and Rose, including one scene of Rose naked on an exercise bike, which ended up heavily censored. Several bits of footage were considered too graphic for broadcast, though other tapes included Fred's never-before-heard interrogation audio. The program aired in 3 parts under the title Fred and Rose West: The Murders, drawing 1.5 million viewers for the first installment. 9 complaints were logged to the Independent Television Commission, but they were dismissed because the ITC felt Channel 5 hadn't crossed any new lines of decency and that the material was shown after 11 p.m. In June 2021, another Channel 5 feature called Fred and Rose West: A British Horror Story reused some clips, such as Rose casually bragging about how her nudity gave her an upper hand with her male partner. The other documentary from 2001 can be found on YouTube, and the 2021 production is on Channel 5's streaming platform. Given the brutal, explicit nature of the couple's self-made porn, it's extremely unlikely that unedited versions will ever become widely available. And in all honesty, I think it's safe to say that the world is much better off not being exposed to what these sick fuckers got up to in the bedroom, so here's hoping they never get leaked. And that's the end of the video, folks. I really hope you're actually seeing this part of the video, since the outro got cut out in my last vid for God knows what reason. But I hope you all had a nice Christmas, since I wanted to wish you all one in the last video. Last year was pretty productive for me in terms of my upload rate, and I hope to keep it up this year and possibly be even more productive. I already have several videos planned, so I hope you all look forward to them. Thank you very much for watching. Be sure to like, comment and subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.